Hey guys, we're getting ready to start our research projects and our research time of the year. And so before we get started, we want to learn about what's the right way to do research so that we don't have trouble with something called plagiarism and copyright laws. So to get us started off, I have a question. Who likes to make money? And I have another question. Who likes it when someone else takes your money and really doesn't do any work for it? Yeah, that's what I thought. I don't like that either. And so we're going to talk about copyright, and that's what those two questions I just asked are very related to the idea of copyright. So, our learning objective for today is given background information on copyright and fair use terms, fourth grade students will conduct research on copyright and educational use of information and describe applications of the laws. Wow, that sounds very serious and very complex, but we're going to break it down so that it's easier for us to understand and so we know the right way to do our work when we're doing research. So what is copyright? I know that's what's on the tip of all of your tongues. Copyright is a protection for all of us who have written something. It keeps someone else from copying our work and putting their name on it. So, the law says that it is illegal for someone to copy or show your piece of writing without your permission. The only exception is the fair use policy. So my mom wrote a reflection for church a few years ago, and she read it at church and a few other places, and she got a lot of compliments on it, and a lot of people liked it and asked her for a copy of it. She went through the official steps for copyright protection, and she copyrighted that reflection, and so now no one can use that reflection without her permission, and no one can say that it's theirs. That's what we are talking about when we talk about copyright. So copyright started in 1976, and it was covered under the Copyright Act of 1976. This act talks about, or this law talks about how we can and cannot use written pieces of work and what protections we have when someone is using something that we've written or something that someone else has written in their own work and claiming it as their own. So think about it. Think about all of the things out there in the world that people have written. Just in our library alone, there are thousands of books. And so many of those people who wrote those books do this for a living. That's their only job, is to write these educational books or these fun books for kids to read to get them into reading. So this is their way to make money, to be able to pay their bills and buy groceries. So what happens if someone else takes their work? Let's say they're outside playing basketball and someone comes along and steals their basketball. Are they going to be able to make money? Probably not. Okay? So same idea with copyright. If someone takes your ideas, it's hard for you to make money and for people to take you seriously when they think you might not have written it. So, to protect or not to protect? What things there are things that we actually do protect under copyright and what's not protected? So, literary works, anything that's a book, anything that's a magazine, or Sports Illustrated or sports magazine, something like that, and music and plays, a dance, and at the movies are all examples of works that are protected by the government so that we don't have issues with plagiarism and with copying someone else's work. So not protected in this idea of protection on the other side, ideas and concepts. Well, that makes sense because there are things that are not written down yet. So no, we're not going to copyright those two things when we don't know what their permanent home is. We cannot protect short phrases. We cannot protect names. A speech. Seems tricky, but it's true because once the baby's old enough, I'm going to start going back to work. And so if that's the case, then you wouldn't be taking those children with you. So let's keep going and let's get going on what we need to do. So what do you do next? If you wrote something like a story or a poem or a song, it is covered by copyright as soon as it is on the paper. Okay, so all of those musicians out there, all of those poets out there, when you write a poem and you're finished with it and you think it's pretty good, and you want to copyright it, that means you want to put that piece of work under the protection of the Copyright Act of 1976. So, if you do that, then someone else cannot take your work and use it as their own. Now, the copyright for your work is going to last for 70 years after you die. So you've got the rest of your life to live with that copyright in your name and that piece of work in your name with the copyright on it, and no one can touch it for the next 70 years after you die. So that's pretty cool that that stays on there for a long time, even after you are no longer living. So here's the deal. When you're doing research or a project for school, read a piece of writing and then write notes in your own words. So what I usually do is I open a book to a page that looks like I'm going to need to do research from, and I will read that page, and then I will close my book. And I close my eyes and I think for a second, and then I go back to my notebook and I write down the short notes, the short phrases of things that I learned and that I thought were important that have to do with my project. I'm sure that you've all noticed in books that there is a copyright symbol inside the book. If you are not sure where it is, then you would go to the front of your book and open up page 33, I think it is, to the office. And you'll see on that page, the back of the title page, you'll see the letter C in a circle. You'll see the year it was first published, and you'll see the name of the copyright owner. That can come in very handy at times, especially if it's a movie, and I'll explain that in just a minute. So, another part of the law is called fair use. Fair use is a part of the law that allows us to use parts of works for educational or research purposes. And that's one reason why it's called fair use, because we want everyone to have access to good pieces of writing, good mentor sentences, and other things that can help us. So, fair use is a part of the law that allows us to use parts of works for educational or research purposes and not have to pay for them and not get in trouble for using them. Now, there are a few stipulations and a few things you have to follow. First of all, we have to be using the work for educational purposes. If you tell the person that you're using it for educational purposes, but then you go home and spread it around the neighborhood, is that educational purposes? No, I didn't think so. If the work is more factual than creative, it's harder to copyright because facts are facts and we can't change them. And so a lot of times authors use their book deals or their book funds when they have a more factual work than a creative work. The rule of thumb is to always use less than more. So a good rule of thumb for you to think about is using 10% of a movie, 10% of a song, 10% of a book, and that way you don't have to worry about the entire piece of work and you aren't going to copy an entire piece of work. If you do, however, take an author's words and put them directly into your writing, you know that you have to use quotation marks to set off that that part of the writing that you've used in their work. Now, a few years ago, I wanted to use a movie in my classroom because we read a book by the same name. And so I ended up having to write to the publisher because I didn't want to only show 10% of the movie. I wanted to show all of the movie. And so I wrote a letter to the producer of the movie and asked if I could use it in my classroom. And he very graciously wrote me a letter back saying that I was able to use that movie in my classroom. So sometimes we have to ask permission of the person who has the copyright to be able to use their work. So let's review. I know we've covered a lot. So we've put together a scavenger hunt that you're going to go and look at some websites. You're going to follow the directions to review the rules of copyright that we've talked about today. And this is going to tell me how well you understood what we talked about. So be careful that you type in the email or the website addresses correctly so that you can go to the correct websites and not get to someplace you don't want to be. So you will have a few moments to work with your partner on doing the scavenger hunt. and reviewing and showing us what you've learned about copyright and fair use. So these are some of the sources that I used to create this PowerPoint, and so that might be something you want to keep in mind if you're doing something along the same ideas.